Okay, so that's what happens when crowd becomes uncontrollable or there is a riot. Now, riot in general sense, no, it is an offense against the public peace. And what we have seen on that presentation is a place where a lot of people are gathering and of course, obviously, there is no peace there. Nagkakagulo, nagkakaroon ng commotion. Yeah. So what happens during riot? It is interpreted as a tumultuous disturbance by several persons who have unlawfully assembled to assist one another by the use of force, if necessary, against anyone opposing them in the execution of some enterprise of a private nature and who execute such enterprise in a violent manner to the terror of people. And the presentation that we have seen earlier is an example of this. So under the law, it is punishable for any organizer or leader of any meeting attended by armed persons for the purpose of committing any of the crimes punishable under the revised penal code. So ang riot, no, it is not lawful. Yan. Kung sino man ang maging organizer or leader of these riots or these meetings, no, which cause uh, troubles and which caused riot, they would be liable under our law. Yan. And if the purpose would be commission of the crimes, no? Example, treason, rebellion, or insurrection, sedition, or assault upon a person in authority of or his agents. No? That is based from our Article 146 in the revised penal code. And it is also punishable for any person who shall cause any serious disturbance in a public place, office, or establishment, or shall interrupt or disturb public functions or gatherings or peaceful meetings under our Article 153 of the revised penal code. So, ibig sabihin, hindi po pwede na basta-basta na lang nagkaroon ng gathering yan, ng hindi lawful or ng walang permission. No? Yan, and mas malala kung magkaroon ng mga riots and hindi makontrol yung crowd or magkaroon ng mga purposes no, which are unlawful. Now, let us proceed with some basic definition of terms. Ayan. So, we have mentioned the word tumultuous. Ayan. So, it is defined as the disturbance or interruption. Ayan. And it will be considered tumultuous if it is caused by more than 3 persons. So, what you should remember in your tumultuous, it should be caused by more than 3 persons who are armed or they are provided with the means of violence. Yan. So, these are the elements that you should remember so that you can consider the event as a tumultuous event. Next, outcry. So, it is defined as the means to shout subversive or proactive words tending to stir up the people to obtain by means of force or violence. To shout subversive. Ibig sabihin, inaapuyan palalo yung gulo by means of the proactive words. So that is the outcry. Kumbaga, ginagatungan pa yung gulo. No, para lalong maging violent yung mga tao. That is outcry. And then, the word crowd, it consists of a body of individual people with no organization. No single partnership. Each individual's behavior is fairly controlled and ruled by reason. All the participants have been thrown by circumstance into a crowd for some common purpose that may give them a least one thing in common. O yung crowd, they are not a particular organization. Yan. Basta na lang nagsama-sama yung mga individual dyan. That is the crowd. Or for example, no, mayroong nangyaring aksidente sa daan. Yan. And yung mga napadaan doon, makikiusyoso. Yan. Yung mga taong yun yung tinatawag nating crowd. No? Wala silang plano, wala silang usapan na dapat magpunta tayo dito. Yan. Nagkataon lang na itong mga taong to, no, they were thrown by the circumstance. And likas naman sa atin, no, na maging usyosero and or others, no, dahil voluntary or dahil gusto nila na mag-join at hindi sila binigyan ng contract or binigyan ng usapan or agreement na mag-join doon sa isang event na yan. Yan. So, they were thrown by the circumstance. Nagkataon na sila yung mga tao nagsama-sama dyan. That is the crowd. Yan. Or, for example, in a concert. Yan. Wala namang particular na organization or partnership yung mga mag-a-attend dyan. No, hindi naman isang organisasyon lang ang nag-a-attend sa ganitong events. So, they were driven by the circumstance. And your mob, a mob takes on the semblance of organization with some common motive for action. So, they have a common motive, no? Such as revenge for a crime committed on the scene where the crowd assembled, an aggravated fight, or a confrontation with the police. So, at time like this, there is already a strong feeling of togetherness or the we are one attitude. Ayan. So, ito naman yung may mga common motive or meron silang common purpose. No? Ayan. So, they are unified by this motive. Ayan. Making them feel that they are together. They have this we are one attitude. And your riot, it is a violent confusion in a crowd. Ayan. Kapag ka nagkakaroon na ng violence, no? Nagkakagulo na, nagkakaroon na ng riot. Ayan. So, how does it start? No? We could probably have the crowd, and then they turn up to be a mob hanggang magkaroon na ng start, no, ng violence. Ayan. So, when the mob becomes violent, then that event becomes a riot. Next, let's talk about the role of planning in crowd control or riot prevention. Ayan. Since our subject, it is more on the planning or operational planning. So, what should we do if there are events like the riot or uncontrollable crowd? Yeah. So, we need a sound organizational planning, training, logistical support, and a high departmental morale. Now, these are all essential, so that we would be successful to counter these events, so that we will have a counter-riot operations and the control of violent civil disorder involving large segments of the population, especially in congested urban areas. Saan madalas mangyari yan? Sa mga urban areas in the cities. Yan, dyan madalas magkaroon ng violent civil disorders such as riots. Yan. So, what do we need to do? We need a disciplined, aggressive police counteraction, which at the same time adheres to the basic enforcement precepts. This is done through effective police operational planning. So, yan ang functions no, ng ating police operational planning. So that we will be sure na with the procedures that we will apply in case of these events. So that we can be prepared kung sakaling magkaroon ng mga ganitong events. And of course, no, kailangan pa rin mag-follow sa protocol no, ng mga police officers. Yan. Sample, kailangan pa rin i-practice yung maximum tolerance, lalo na sa mga ganitong violent civil disorders. Yan. Dahil prone ang police officers no, with the risk. Yan. And, of course, there are times na nagkakaroon na ng, dahil violent na nga yung nangyayari, no? There are wars between the police and the civilians. Okay? So, ano yung madalas na mangyari? And sometimes, yung nakaka-capture, yung moment na ang police officer, no, probably defending himself against the violent civilians. And these civilians would think that the police are violent, and which is not true. Okay, because they are just doing their job. Okay. Yeah. So through planning, the law violators can be arrested. Kaya nga kapag nagkakaroon ng mga illegal rallies na nagiging riots, yan, may mga inaaresto ang police officers. Ayan. And of course, no, this should be in line with the legal frameworks. And dapat palaging may reasonable force or dapat reasonable force lang ang ina-apply. So without an immediate decisive police action, the continually recurring conditions of civil unrest and lawlessness could quickly evolve into a full-scale riot. And of course, kapag full-scale riot na yan, there would be a lot of damages sa paligid nila. And of course, injuries to those who participated in the riot. And there are instances na may mga namamatay pa sa mga riots. And so, police planning could provide the best police reaction and order can be restored with a minimum property damage and injury. So, ito yung goal natin in case of these events. No? Minimum of property damage and injury. And so, next, what are the police purpose and objectives in anti-riot operations? And so, first is the containment. Yan. So, unlawful assembly and riot are as contagious as plague. No? Madaling kumalat yan. Pagka nagkaroon ng riot, doon pa lang sa ilang individuals, kakalat na yan. Mabilis kumalat yan. No, it is like a contagious disease na kumakalat sa mga tao. Yan. So, in here, all persons who are at scene should be advised to leave the area para hindi sila maapektuhan ng riot, thereby reducing the number of potential anti-police combatants. Kumbaga, maglagay na tayo ng boundary. Alisin na natin yung mga possible na mahawa or madamay doon sa riot. We need to contain it. And dispersal. Yan. Kapag dumating na sa point na kailangan na nating mag-disperse ng mga tao because they are being very violent. Yan. The crowd of unlawful assembly or riot should be dispersed at once. It may appear at first to be a legal assembly, but the nature of assembly at the time of the arrival of the police may clearly distinguish it as being unlawful. Kapag dumating ang police officers dyan at nagkaroon ng violent reactions, yan, itong ating crowd or the mob, then, there might be something unlawful with that. And so, once it is determined, the responsibility of the police is to command the people to disperse. Ano ba yung disperse? Maghiwa-hiwalay sila dyan. Yan. And crowd control formations may be done if necessary to expedite their movements. Yan. So, kailangan na tanggalin natin sila doon sa pagsasama-sama nila to become violent altogether. We need to disperse them. Kaya nga, ang techniques kung minsan, sila ay binobombahan ng tubig. Next, prevention of entry or re-entry. Yan. So, isa sa goals natin yan. For example, we have already contained the crowd or the mob. No? Yan. Napaalis na natin yung iba bago pa sila madamay. We need to prevent them from their entry or their re-entry or kung meron pang mga individuals na gustong pumasok dyan. Yan. So, the police have to protect the area once the people have moved out or dissipated into smaller groups to prevent them from returning. Yan. So, we need to enforce quarantine by not allowing the group to resume their actions. And, of course, we need to arrest the violator. So, once the first acts of the police upon the arrival at the scene of the disturbance is to locate and isolate individuals who are inciting the crowd to violate or flagrantly violating the law, prevent any attempt by the crowd or mob to rescue those arrested by enforcing total quarantine. So, we need to arrest the violator. Yan, lalo na at nandyan ang police officers at nakikita yung kanilang violations, in flagrante delicto. And they are caught or they were caught in the act of violating the law. And of course, those who are not obeying the police officers. Yan. Kaya nga may mga arrests na nangyayari during those events. And of course, establish priorities. So, depending upon the circumstances, it is always necessary to establish priorities, assessing the situation to determine the nature of assistance and number of men needed is part of the planning process. And how do we establish that? And since we are going to disperse, and we need to prioritize yung mga vulnerable dyan. Or yung mga nadadamay lang. Yan. So, we need to prioritize. We need to protect them. Lalo na kung may mga bata na napasali dyan or old people, those who are vulnerable. Yan. So, it is important to assess the situation and ano yung ating gagawin doon sa ating plan. Pagpunta doon, ano yung priority natin na gawin. Yan. So, next, what are the basic procedures in anti-riot operations? Yan. So, first, kapag may mga anti-riot or if we are going to do the anti-riot operation, the first thing to do is to assess the situation. Yan. Tignan muna natin yung sitwasyon. Hindi po pwede na basta tayo susugod doon, hindi natin alam kung ano meron doon sa sitwasyon na yan. So, we need to determine whether the original purpose of the gathering was lawful or not. Yan. Lawful ba yung gathering na yan or hindi? If it is lawful, then there's no need to disperse or to conduct dispersal or containment in that area. But, would we still proceed? It depends, And they can conduct, police officers can conduct area security. And in this, if there are gatherings like this, lawful, or if they are lawful, and if they are not, of course, the necessary procedures would be done. And determine also the lawfulness at the time of the arrival at the scene. Yan. So, pagdating doon, lawful pa rin ba ang ginagawa nilang actions? And assess their attitude, emotional state, and their general condition. Diba? May mga nagsisigawan na ba dyan? May mga nagagalit na ba? May mga nagkakasakitan na ba dyan? And determine any state of intoxication and other conditions that may lead to violence. Tignan natin sa crowd. Baka isa sa kanila or yung ilan sa kanila, mga lasing na pala. Yan. And naghahanap sila ng away o ng gulo. Yan. At kung may problema, no, we need to identify the cause of the problem. And we need to locate and identify the leaders and agitators. Mga agitators na to, sila yung nagpapalala doon sa riot. Okay, next step. Survey the scene. So, we need to determine as soon as possible the best condition of the command post. Saan ba natin dapat ilagay yung ating command post? Saan yung strategic position or location yan? Yan. So, we need to locate the best vintage point of observations. Kailangan, kapag nandito tayo sa location na yan, nakikita natin, no, we have a sight and of the whole area. And we need to consider geographical factors such as natural barriers, buildings, and weather condition. May mga natural barriers ba dyan? May mga puno ba dyan? Yan. Or lands, no? Yan. Or terrains. And yung weather condition natin, may mga buildings ba dyan? Yan. And note the best method of approach. Yan. So, we need to study what approach should we do, no, in handling the situation. Yan. And we need to communicate. Report on your assessment, keeping your assessment brief but concise, giving your superior the sufficient data with which to proceed for plans of action. It is important na complete ang information na ibigay sa superior. Dapat mag-report na maayos para malaman kung ano yung susunod na steps na gagawin in accordance to the plan. And ask for assistance or help from the command post, hence remain close to the radio as possible until additional units arrive or to communicate new developments. Kung may mga changes dyan sa ating crowd, yan, we need to report that. Next, maintain a watchful waiting. And so you need to make your presence known to the people in the vicinity. And if the crowd is too much to handle, stay near the command post and wait for additional support units. No? You still need to secure your safety. Yan. And use radio or other means of communications to call for assistance. And since mahirap ang communication kung malayo yung ibang support units or yung ibang members of the police, and make preparations for decisive police action. So, ibig sabihin, hintayin lang natin. Tignan lang natin yung sitwasyon. Kung lumala yan, kailangan gumawa na tayo ng action. Pero dapat, ipakita natin yung presence of the police officers. Para matakot sila na gumawa ng something that is unlawful. Pero kung mahirap na talaga, nung i-handle yung mga yan, i-secure mo muna yung iyong safety. And make sure that you would be able to communicate with the other members for assistance. And concentrate on rescue and self-defense. Hindi tayo po pwedeng magpakabayani dyan. Mahirap ang sitwasyon na yan. Kung mayroong violent crowd, kung may riot na nangyayari. Mahirap yung awat ka doon ng awat, but in the end, you will cause a lot of injuries. It is best to, of course, defend yourself while doing your job. And apply first aid to the injured people, and self-protection must be considered. And remember the primary objective of protecting lives, property, and the restoration of order. Yan. The first rule is to secure your safety first. Hindi po pwede na you are securing safety of others while you yourself yan, ay hindi naman na pala safe or you are injured. Yan. You might suffer from injuries na mahirap na gumaling and that would be very difficult. Yan. And maintain an open line of communication. You need to keep the dispatcher advised on the progress of the scene and continue directing the support units to the scene and the general perimeter control. Yan. Kailangan your location or you need to keep track. Yan. Hindi po pwedeng mawala ka na lang dyan sa map na yan. Yan. That would be very risky. Next, establish a command post. So, follow what is in your contingency plan for civil disturbance and make every police officer aware of the command post for proper coordination. And you need to take immediate action for serious violations. Arrest perpetrators, isolate the leaders or agitators from the crowd, and show full police force strength. And dito, kailangan natin ng police force strength, full police force strength. And last, give the dispersal order. Disperse the crowd upon order. Anti-riot formations and procedures must be used, and use of force necessary for dispersal may be considered. So, still, dapat reasonable force pa rin. So, here are our guidelines. Number 1, pre-planning must be high on the agenda whenever the department anticipates any disorder or major disturbance. How do we anticipate that? Kapag magkakaroon ng mga major events or even minor events. For example, magkakaroon ng SONA. Yan, ang president. Asahan na natin na there would be crowd there and possibly magkaroon ng mob dyan and later on maging riot. So we must be anticipating for these events. And number 2, meet with responsible leaders at the scene and express your concern for assuring them their constitutional guarantees. Request them to disperse the crowd before attempting to police action. So, kung nagkakaroon na ng scene dyan, o ng commotions, kung sino yung mga leaders dyan, we can talk to them at kung pwede na nilang i-disperse. We can request them to disperse this crowd bago pa man magkaroon ng police action. Bago pa humantong doon sa point na kailangan ng umaksyon ng police at mag-aresto ng mga violators. Yan. And maintain order and attempt to quell the disturbance without attempting to punish any violators. And hindi po pwedeng ilagay sa kamay yung pag-punish sa mga violators. But we can arrest these violators, but not to punish them at that instant moment. Yan. And use only the force that is necessary, but take positive and decisive action. So, dito nagagamitin yung police discretion. Yan. Kung ano yung action na dapat gawin. Of course, kailangan laging depensahan yung sarili. Yan. You choose, of course, life. And number 5, post the quarantine area with signs and barricades if necessary. And keep the traffic lane open for emergency and support vehicle. Dahil, possibly, magkaroon ng mga injured people in the riot. So, kailangan makadaan pa rin dyan yung ambulance. So, we need to contain and eventually disperse them. And consider the fact that most impressive police action at the scene of any type of major disturbance is the expeditious removal of the leaders by a well-disciplined squad of officers. Dahil ang papakinggan nila, no, most likely, ay yung leader din nila and not the police officers. Yan. And for riot control, we need to consider the following. So, take note of the following. First is the surprise offensive. Surprise offensive. So, the police action in its initial stages at a riot must be dramatic. The elements of surprise may enhance effectiveness of riot control. Sometimes, kailangan nyo silang gulatin so that it would be easy to disperse them. And security of information. And so, plans for action and communications regarding the movement of personnel and equipment should be kept confidential. And why do we need to keep it confidential? So that hindi makapag-produce ng strategy itong ating mob. Yan, para ma-counter yung police action. And maximum utilization of force. So, a show of police force should be made in a well-organized manner, compact and efficient in a military-type squad formation. Yan. Actually, ang PNP, no, ay may CDM formation or may CDM. Yan, the Civil Disturbance Management. And there are different formations that we will talk about later. Yan. And flexibility of assignments. So, police officers or officers and terms, no, should be flexibility assigned to various places where the need is greatest. Yan. So, dapat kung saan i-assign, no, yung ating mga officers during that time, they should be flexible enough to adapt to the situation. Yan. And simplicity, keep the plan as simple as possible. Huwag na natin gawing complicated yung ating plan para mabilis na masundan yung instruction and to avoid mass confusion, no, among our officers. Hindi yung pagdating nila doon, hindi nila alam kung ano yung gagawin dahil magulo yung instruction. So, dapat clear and simple ang instructions. Yan. So, let's proceed to the civil disturbance management operations. So, we have the civil disturbance management operations, no? The guidelines, ayan ang ating PNP. So, ang ating PNP, they are tasked to maintain peace and order. And shall not interfere with the holding of a public assembly. Kung may lawful public assembly dyan, hindi po pwedeng basta na lang mag-interfere ang PNP. Yan. And to ensure public safety, yan, may CDM ang ating PNP. So, a civil disturbance management contingent under the command of a police commission officer. So, dapat commission officer ang police officer natin. No? With the rank of police senior inspector. Yan. Ano ang rank, no, ng ating police officer? Yan. Who would command our contingents for CDM, that is police senior inspector or higher. And so, he or she shall be detailed and stationed at least 100 meters away from the place where the public assembly is being held. Yan. So, remember these guidelines na dahil ito ang dapat na sundin in case of civil disturbance. Yan. So, in the absence of any permit from the LGU concern or local government concern, the PCO in command should exert effort in persuading the demonstrators to disperse peacefully. No, as much as possible, mag-disperse peacefully and vacate the public ways. And in lightning rallies and or demonstrations, the ground commander shall exhaust efforts through dialogue with the leaders or organizers for voluntary dispersal. Idaan muna yan sa usapan. And now, kung hindi na yan madaan sa usapan, orderly dispersal to include apprehension of those responsible is resorted to. And kung ayaw nilang sumunod, no, na sila ay kakausapin na lang para magkaroon ng voluntary dispersal, then pwede nang mag-proceed with the apprehension of those who are responsible for that civil disturbance. Yan. And section 2, specific guidelines. So when assistance is requested by the leaders or organizers, it shall be imperative for the CDM contingent to perform their duties while observing the rights of demonstrators. Further, the members of the CDM contingent dealing with the demonstrators shall be in prescribed uniform. So, yung ating CDM contingents, the police officers na member ng CDM or contingents for CDM, of course, dapat suot nila ang prescribed uniform when they conduct the CDM. And the CDM contingent shall not carry any kind of firearms. So, take note of this. No. Yan. Kapag ang activity is CDM, hindi po pwedeng magdala ng kahit anong type of firearms. Small arms man yan or long arms. Pero ano yung equipment po na po pwede nating dalhin, no? That is baton or riot sticks. Crash helmets with visor, gas masks. Yan, dahil possibly, no? Yan, hindi natin alam kung kailan magbabato ng tear gas or may dalabang tear gas yung individuals doon sa mob. Yan, or sa crowd. What else? Boots or ankle-high shoes with shin guards. Yan. So, ito po ang mga equipment na maaaring dalhin mo. Yan ang ating CDM contingents. Ang hindi po pwede, any kind of firearms. Yan. And tear gas, smoke grenades, water cannons, or any similar anti-riot device shall not be used. Yan. Hindi po pwedeng gamitin. Unless, yan, there is an exception to the rule, the public assembly is attended by actual violence or serious threats of violence. Yan. So, kailan tayo po pwedeng magdala ng mga anti-riot device if there is an actual violence or serious threats of violence or deliberate destruction of property. Pero, kailangan pa rin i-observe ang maximum tolerance. And the organization and membership of CDM contingents, as well as their deployment and employment, shall be in accordance with with existing PNP rules and regulations. So, kung sino yung i-deploy natin dyan sa CDM, dapat pa rin tayong sumunod sa ating PNP rules and regulations. Yan. And Section 3, CDM operational tasks. So, here are the operational tasks of our civil disturbance management contingents. So, first, they need to isolate the area and secure likely targets. They also need to control the crowds, establish area control, and neutralize special threats. Yan. So, let's proceed with the kinds of formations. Ano po ba yung mga CDM formations? No? First is the standby formation. And this is the preparatory formation. And we also have the single line formation. So, this is executed when the crowd is within the state of control. And we have the double line formation. So, this is executed to support, beat up the single line formation. So, this is done when the crowd starts to become unruly and they start pushing the first line. So, kailangan natin ng another line for that. Ayan. And you have your wedge formation. A wedge formation is executed to penetrate or break the crowd. This is usually done when there is that necessity to separate, isolate, unruly, and violent groups in a crowd. Ayan. So, ito yung ating standby formation. Ayan. And then, here's your single line formation. Makikita nyo, yan, nakaline lang dyan ng ating police officers. Yan. And then, double line formation. You have your first line here and your second line here. Yan. And this is the wedge formation. Yan. Hindi lang masyadong kita dito. But here's the wedge formation. Yan. So, ganito ang appearance ng wedge formation. Ayan. And you also have the double wedge formation. Ayan. Kung nakita nyo kanina, si wedge, diba? Ayan. So, we need to double the wedge. Here. Ayan. So, this has a stronger capability to penetrate, no? And protection from violent moves by the crowd. And we also have the arrow formation. It is designated to escort VIPs. So, kung may mga VIP tayo na naipit dyan sa crowd. Okay? And the number of personnel to compose the formation depends on the level of status of the crowd. And you also have your circle formation. Yan. So, it is any close formation. Now, this is designated to isolate a violent crowd and the eventual arrest of a crowd leader or a violent initiator. We also have the umbrella formation. So, this kind of formation is utilized when the crowd becomes unruly and will start attacking the control of the force. So, ito ang ating arrow formation. Next, the U formation. Yan. So, we have others. We also have this closed formation. And the push formation. And the cover formation. So next, let's talk about the special problems in crowd control and riot operations. Ano pa ba yung other problems na po pwede natin ma-encounter? And what are these special problems? Yan. First, what if there are snipers? Yan. So certain psychopathic people may attempt to take advantage of the mass confusion and excitement at a riot scene by taking a concealed position and shooting at people with some type of weapons. So, we need to survey the area, no? If there might be snipers sa mga buildings. How do we handle this? We need to clear the area of innocent bystanders. Isolate the area and guard against possible escape of suspects. And use whatever force necessary to take him in the custody. And we also need to assign anti-snipers team, especially in aggravated situations. And actually, in some movies, no, yan, you can also see some scenes like this. And for example, there is a gathering, and there is an attempt to assassinate, for example, a president of the country. And there would be some commotion of the crowd. And then, may mga snipers pala that would shoot people na lalong mag-a-adapt doon sa kaguluhan. But their target, no, is to shoot some people and, of course, no, yung maybe these VIPs, yung mga personalities na nandoon. And meron din tayong mga arsonists, no, na maaaring ma-encounter. So, these persons holding torch in their hands are potential arsonists. So, kailangan din natin bantayan yung mga yan. And they must be taken into custody immediately before pa nila maisagawa ang kanilang plan. And there are also looters. So, the acts of simple misdemeanor thefts or may consist of robbery or breaking and entering. Yan. Yung mga nagtitake advantage sa sitwasyon. Nakuha pa nilang magnakaw doon sa sitwasyon na yan. Dahil nga naman, hindi mapapansin. Mas madali ang kanilang escape. Yan. So, kapag nahuli natin yung mga looters na yan, we need to take the suspects into custody by whatever means are necessary. Yan. So, that ends our discussion. And for the crowd control and the riot operation.